is the story the CIA hoped would die with the burned files. People woke up strapped to hospital beds. They didn't know their names. They didn't know why. They couldn't remember who had done this to them, only that someone had been inside their mind. America did this to its own citizens, not an enemy, not a foreign dictator, the United States government. For years, a secret program tried to crack the human mind like a code, to erase memories, to rewrite personality, to turn people into something useful. They called it MKUltra. Most of its files were destroyed. The rest were buried. The victims were silenced, discredited, or driven mad. On the surface, the 1950s looked clean, safe, and hopeful. Underneath, the Cold War was a constant, invisible pressure. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a psychological arms race, not just for weapons, but for minds. In Washington, a single fear grew like a shadow. What if the Soviets had discovered mind control? Reports, some real, some imagined, began to circulate. Stories of American prisoners of war in Korea suddenly praising their captors. Soldiers returning home with strange confessions. Politicians whispered a terrifying phrase: brainwashing. Inside the CIA, this wasn't a paranoid fantasy. It was treated as a national security emergency. At the center of this anxiety was CIA Director Allen Dulles, a quiet, calculating man who believed the battlefield of the future was the human mind. In 1953, Dulles approved a secret project with one purpose: to understand, break, and reprogram the human psyche. Codename MKUltra. This was not one experiment in one lab. It was a network, a hidden architecture of control. The CIA began funding psychiatrists, universities, prisons, and hospitals. Money flowed through fake foundations and front organizations. On paper, it looked like harmless research into behavior and mental health. In reality, something forbidden was being born. In New York, San Francisco, and other cities, the CIA set up secret safe houses, apartments wired with microphones, two-way mirrors, and hidden cameras. In Canada and the United States, respected hospitals quietly accepted grants. Behind locked doors, inside these rooms, a new science was being invented, not to heal the mind, but to break it. To the CIA, the human mind became a lab rat, and MKUltra's scientists used every tool they could find. One of their favorite tools was LSD. At first, the drug seemed like a miracle, a colorless, tasteless chemical that could shatter a person's grip on reality. CIA doctors began to see it as a potential truth serum, a way to manipulate thoughts, to break resistance. So they started testing it on prisoners, on mental patients, on civilians, on their own colleagues. Often there was no warning, no consent. Imagine this. You're having a drink at a bar with a colleague you've known for years. You laugh, talk about work, politics, family. You finish your drink and go home. Hours later, the walls begin to melt. Voices echo inside your head. You can't tell if you're awake or dreaming. Terror fills your body, but you don't know why. You have just been dosed by your own government. In CIA safe houses, sex workers were secretly hired to bring men back to rooms wired with surveillance. The men were drugged, watched, and recorded as they spiraled into chemically induced madness. The operation had a name as grotesque as its methods: Operation Midnight Climax. Behind the glass, agents smoked, took notes, and joked as their subjects begged reality to make sense again. But LSD was only the beginning. In some hospitals, electroconvulsive therapy, electroshock, was pushed far beyond humane limits.
While regular medical practice used controlled doses, MKUltra-linked experiments reportedly used shocks up to 40 times the normal intensity. Patients were blasted into oblivion, not to heal, but to erase. Sleep, too, became a weapon. Subjects were put into drug-induced comas for days, weeks, sometimes longer. Tapes whispered messages into their ears for hours on end. You are not afraid. You will obey. You will forget. These were attempts at psychic driving, repeating phrases so many times that the mind might break and rebuild around them. In isolation rooms, people sat in darkness, with no sound, no sense of time. Sensory deprivation tanks cut off touch, sight, and sound. When the brain is starved of input, it begins to invent its own reality. Hallucinations, paranoia, breakdown. MKUltra scientists took notes. They wanted to know, how long until a person stops knowing who they are? How far can you push before the mind simply shatters?
Behind every test tube, every flickering fluorescent light, there was a single, chilling idea. If you can tear a personality apart, maybe you can build a new one in its place. Programs like MKUltra are often described in abstract clinical terms: subjects, data, outcomes. But behind every file number was a human being. One of them was Frank Olson. Olson was a civilian scientist working with the US military and the CIA. In 1953, without his knowledge, he was secretly dosed with LSD at a CIA retreat. Over the next days, his behavior changed. He became anxious, paranoid, deeply disturbed by the work he was involved in. 9 days later, he plunged from the 13th floor of a New York hotel. The official story? Suicide. The reality? Tangled in secrecy, conflicting accounts, and decades of unanswered questions. His family would spend years trying to understand what truly happened that night and what the CIA was hiding. But Frank wasn't alone. In hospitals across North America, thousands of patients believed they were getting help. They came in for anxiety, depression, or minor emotional issues. They trusted the doctors in white coats. They signed forms they didn't fully understand. They were told, "This will help you sleep. This will cure your anxiety. This will make you better." Instead, they were plunged into nightmarish drug trips. Others were subjected to enormous electroshocks that wiped out past memories. Some forgot their own children. Some forgot their marriages. Some forgot who they had been before the treatment. Imagine waking up and realizing your life feels like a story someone told you, not something you lived. There were also ordinary citizens, people who never set foot in a lab, customers in bars, commuters, partygoers. They were dosed in secret tests meant to see what would happen if LSD broke loose in the real world. One moment, they were living their normal lives. The next, they were falling through a trap door in their own minds. The emotions that followed were not temporary. Fear, confusion, gaps in memory that never fully closed, a lingering sense that something had been taken from them, something invisible but vital. For some, the experiments shattered identity itself. They did not just lose memories, they lost the narrative of who they were. The government called it research. The victims called it something else: a theft of the self. By the early 1970s, the world was changing. The Vietnam War, the Pentagon Papers, Watergate. Trust in government was cracking. Inside the CIA, another fear grew. What if someone discovered MKUltra? In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms made a decision that would erase decades of secrets. Almost. He ordered that most MKUltra documents be destroyed. Truckloads of files, records of experiments, names, locations went into incinerators. The goal was simple: If there was no paper trail, there was no proof. But not everything burned. Around 20,000 financial and administrative documents survived by accident, misfiled in a different building. They were the ghosts of a program Helms thought he had buried. Then came the leaks. Whispers inside the intelligence community, suspicious journalists, investigators who started pulling at loose threads. Whistleblowers spoke. Reports surfaced hinting that the CIA had been experimenting on its own citizens. At first, it sounded like conspiracy theory. Then the evidence began to stack up. In the mid-1970s, the U.S. Senate launched a series of high-profile investigations into intelligence abuses. One of them would become infamous: the Church Committee. Television cameras rolled as senators questioned CIA officials under oath. Did you drug people without their consent? Did you experiment on prisoners? Did you try to control human behavior? The answers, often evasive and cagey, revealed enough. Yes, it had happened. Yes, MKUltra was real, and no, we may never know everything that was done. This is when the lies began to leak out. What was once a rumor became a documented reality. The U.S. government had run a secret program to manipulate and break minds, and it had spent years trying to cover its tracks. The music shifts, quieter but still tense. The end of MKUltra on paper was not the end for its victims. Families like Frank Olson's filed lawsuits demanding the truth in some form of justice. Some received settlements, others got apologies that felt hollow against the weight of what had been done. Many were told that records no longer existed or had never been kept. Government agencies responded with a familiar pattern: admit just enough to appear transparent, deny the worst, and bury the rest in classified archives. Survivors came forward with stories of shattered lives. Former patients described years of confusion, mental illness, and broken relationships. Some discovered, decades later, that their suffering had a name: MKUltra. But for many, it was too late to truly rebuild. Beyond the courtroom, something else broke: trust. MKUltra became a symbol of how far a government might go when fear collides with power. It sowed a lasting suspicion about the CIA and other intelligence agencies. If this could happen in the 1950s and 60s, what else was possible? And there was another legacy, one harder to see, but just as real. Some techniques developed during this era did not vanish. Concepts of sensory deprivation, psychological pressure, and manipulating environment to gain control over a subject found echoes in later interrogation methods and detention programs. Publicly, MKUltra was condemned. Privately, its lessons were studied. The program was over. The mindset that created it was not. They say MKUltra ended decades ago. The files were burned, the witnesses are dying, the memories are broken. But secrets in governments don't vanish. They evolve, they adapt, they change shape. MKUltra never ended, it just changed names. If this is what happened in the 1950s, imagine what we will discover 50 years from now.